What looks like a haunted fortress rising from the ocean was once the most crowded place on Earth.
This island has been abandoned for quite some time.
Once forgotten by the world, then rediscovered by James Bond, it's often called Japan's Ghost Island.
A city with no streets left, no people, no warning, just silence. Once the most crowded place in the world, now completely abandoned. This is the story of the island Japan tried to forget. In the late 1800s, off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan discovered a tiny rocky island. At first glance, it looked worthless, a barren piece of land, barely visible above the waves. But beneath its rocky surface lay a treasure coal. In 1890, the industrial giant Mitsubishi saw the potential and bought the island for 100,000 yen. They named it Hashima. But it quickly became known as something else, Gunkanjima, Battleship Island, named after its uncanny resemblance to a warship cutting through the sea. To protect their investment from typhoons and the relentless ocean, Mitsubishi built towering seawalls around the island. Using slag, the waste left from mining, they expanded the island's size to about 16 acres, creating enough land for an industrial fortress in the middle of the sea. In 1916, they constructed a 6-story concrete building. The first concrete high-rise in Japan was designed to house 3,000 workers. Just a year later, they added a 9-story structure. At the time, these buildings weren't just impressive, they were revolutionary. The island grew rapidly, and soon, mining tunnels stretched nearly 1 kilometer beneath the ocean floor. Hashima wasn't just a mine. It was becoming a city, rising like a battleship above the waves, ready to fuel Japan's industrial ambitions for decades to come. But this fortress would have a dark side, and soon, the island's prosperity would become inseparable from pain. Beneath the concrete towers and bustling streets of Hashima lay a different world, dark, dangerous, and hidden from the sun. These were the mines, where men descended more than 1 kilometer under the ocean floor, carving coal from narrow tunnels. Conditions underground were brutal. It was hot, cramped, and filled with choking dust. Workers faced gas leaks, flooding, and explosions. One particularly devastating blast in the 1930s left many dead and injured. During World War II, the demand for coal skyrocketed. Miners endured unbearable working hours, forced to dig faster and deeper. Food was scarce. Meals were mostly bean dregs and brown rice, barely enough to sustain life. By the 1960s, Hashima reached its peak, extracting over 410,000 tons of coal every year, fueling Japan's booming industries. But at what cost? Over the decades, hundreds died in accidents or succumbed to exhaustion. During World War II alone, over 120 workers lost their lives beneath this fortress of industry. Coal built Hashima, but every brick, every street, every towering apartment was paid for by sweat, suffering, and lives lost beneath the waves. The city above might have looked impressive, but below ground, the truth was dark, darker than the coal. Behind Hashima's towering walls and bustling streets was a painful truth, a truth Japan tried to hide for decades. During World War II, as demand for coal soared, Mitsubishi turned to forced labor. Thousands of men and boys from Korea and China were brought here against their will, turning Hashima Island into a grim, isolated prison. These workers endured unimaginable hardship. Shackled, starved, and subjected to violence, they labored relentlessly underground. Safety measures were almost non-existent, and deaths became tragically common. Those who survived recalled sleeping in crowded, filthy barracks, living in constant fear of explosions, illness, or beatings. Hashima's story isn't just coal and concrete. It's also one of human suffering, a dark chapter Japan would rather forget, even decades later. when the island was nominated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These painful memories resurfaced, sparking intense debate between Japan, Korea, and China. Today, the abandoned buildings stand silent, but the whispers remain, echoing voices of those who suffered here, reminding us that history isn't just about what we build, but also about the truths we leave buried. From afar, Hashima Island looked imposing, even lifeless. But step inside, and you'd find yourself in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. By the 1950s, more than 5,200 people were crammed into just 16 acres of concrete land. Streets were narrow, buildings pressed tightly together, and privacy was practically non-existent. Yet, life flourished. Amidst the towering apartments were schools, hospitals, and grocery stores. Mitsubishi even built cinemas and entertainment centers, all free for workers and their families, an attempt to provide relief from the harsh conditions below ground. In 1963, rooftop gardens were planted, creating patches of green in a city otherwise dominated by gray concrete. Remarkably resilient, Hashima even survived powerful typhoons, like the one in 1957, standing firm against the stormy seas. At its height, Hashima wasn't just an industrial island. It was a thriving community, a miniature city in the sea. But beneath this bustling surface, everyone knew the truth. Hashima was an isolated artificial fortress built solely for coal, and as coal lost its value, so too would the lives built around it. The end was already approaching, and it would be swift, sudden, and silent. In the late 1960s, the world began shifting away from coal, embracing new energy sources like oil. Hashima's coal was no longer valuable, and its fortress quickly turned from a bustling city to a financial burden. By the early 1970s, the mine was losing money fast. Mitsubishi responded swiftly, laying off over 2,000 workers almost overnight. Shops closed, classrooms emptied, streets grew quiet. Then came the final blow. In January 1974, Mitsubishi officially announced the closure of the mine, giving residents only 3 months to leave their homes forever. Families hurriedly packed belongings, leaving behind furniture, toys, clothes, everything they couldn't carry. On April 4th, 1974, the last worker stepped onto a boat bound for Nagasaki. Hashima Island fell silent. Buildings once filled with laughter and life stood eerily empty. Dishes are still on the tables, classrooms untouched. Clocks stopped at the hour the electricity shut off. It wasn't just abandoned, it was frozen. A city where life didn't just fade away, it vanished overnight. For over 3 decades after the last residents left, Hashima Island remained completely sealed off, officially forbidden, strictly guarded. No outsiders were allowed to set foot on the island. With each passing year, the buildings began to decay, but strangely, nature never fully reclaimed this concrete fortress. Its towering structures stood stubbornly intact, creating an eerie sense of suspended time, as though the island was waiting patiently for life to return. Apartments, classrooms, theaters, all once full of noise and activity, now echoed with silence. Rusted playground swings swayed gently in the ocean breeze. Empty windows stared blankly toward the sea, and hallways remained untouched, covered in decades of dust. Hashima became Japan's most haunting ghost town, a place trapped in limbo, forgotten by the world outside. It would stay hidden like this until 2009. After 35 years of silence, the island finally reopened its gates, drawing curious eyes from around the world, eager to explore the city that had vanished overnight. In 2009, Hashima Island's decades of silence were finally broken, not by returning residents, but by cameras. Suddenly, the forgotten fortress caught the attention of filmmakers and TV producers. The History Channel's Life After People chose the island as the perfect example of what Earth might look like without humanity. Its eerie, abandoned apartments and rusting industrial structures illustrated the haunting beauty of a world without people. But Hashima's most famous appearance came in 2012 in the James Bond movie Skyfall. The island's concrete ruins became the sinister lair of Bond's enemy, Silva, placing the ghost town squarely into global pop culture. Overnight, Hashima Island was transformed from a forgotten relic to a cinematic icon. These appearances sparked worldwide fascination, bringing waves of visitors eager to see the mysterious Battleship Island with their own eyes. Hashima had once again found life, not as a city, but as an unforgettable symbol of decay, beauty, and mystery, immortalized forever on screen. In 2009, Japan proposed Hashima Island as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, hoping to preserve it as a landmark of industrial history. But this nomination quickly stirred international controversy. South Korea and China strongly objected, demanding recognition of the forced laborers who suffered on the island during World War II. For them, Hashima represented painful memories, stories of hardship and injustice that couldn't simply be overlooked. After years of intense debate, UNESCO granted World Heritage status to Hashima Island in 2015. However, the recognition came with a condition. Japan had to acknowledge its troubled history and clearly honor the memory of the forced laborers. Today, tourists visiting the island learn about both sides of its legacy, the groundbreaking industry, and the darker truth hidden beneath. Hashima Island now stands not just as a relic of industrial achievement, but as a powerful reminder that history isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth remembering. In 2009, after 35 years of silence, Hashima Island reopened to the world. But this time, no one came to work. They came to witness. Tour boats began departing from Nagasaki, carrying curious travelers, historians, and filmmakers to Japan's most haunting ghost town. Visitors can't freely wander. Only a narrow, elevated path allows a glimpse into what remains. Cracked walls, hollow stairwells, rusted playgrounds, abandoned homes, all frozen mid-collapse, untouched since 1974. For some, it's an urban explorer's dream. For others, a sight of quiet mourning. And for many, simply a place that makes you wonder how a city could disappear so completely and still feel so alive. The trees that workers once planted on rooftops still stand. The buildings remain, weathered but proud, and beneath it all, the silence continues, echoing the stories of thousands who lived, worked, and suffered here. Hashima may no longer mine coal, but it still extracts something deeper: memory.